What if one of you is the monster?
Monster? We're British, you know.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Horror Double Bill, the podcast where each week I put two films together to create something far greater than the sum of its parts. I'm Craig Johnson, and this week I'm unwrapping the horrors of friendship with two movies from 2015 that both ask the questions: what do you do when people you once thought you knew are no longer the people you remember? And how long should you stick around to find out exactly who or what they have become? First up, we have They Look Like People, the debut from indie director Perry Blackshear, and a film which explores the bonds of male friendship as well as the impacts of male insecurity, as two friends reunite in New York for the first time since college. Then we head over to the West Coast for another reunion, this time in Los Angeles, with The Invitation from director Karin Kusama, a movie which is a study of paranoia and the impact of grief, and depicts a group of old friends meeting for a dinner party, where everything rapidly falls apart. Both of this week's films are shining examples of American independent horror cinema, and draw to a greater or lesser degree from the notion of replacement horror, the idea that someone close to you has been substituted by someone or something else, creating a heightened sense of paranoia and raising questions as to whether perceptions are reality or indeed reliable. So, along the way, we'll be discussing some of the classics of this subgenre from literature, cinema, and television. Before we do that though, as always, I'd like to acknowledge the key references that I've used in creating this episode, all of which will be, as usual, listed or linked in the show notes. For the discussion on replacement horror, I have referred to the book Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a tribute, edited by Kevin McCarthy and Ed Gorman. For the segment on They Look Like People, I've referred to interviews with the cast and crew and also the director and cast commentaries on the 2022 Yellow Veil Pictures Blu-ray release. I've also referred to a 2015 interview with Perry Blackshear that can be found on sci-fi-now.com and several articles on screenanarchy.com, and all of those will, of course, be listed and linked. And for the section on The Invitation, I've referred to interviews and commentaries with the writers, cast and crew on the Blu-ray release from Second Sight Films. I've also used an interview with Karin Kusama at the Directors Guild of America, which can be found on YouTube, an interview with Logan Marshall Green, written by Jonathan James on the website dailydead.com, and numerous interviews and articles from filmmakermagazine.com and the website Go Into the Story, the official screenwriting blog of The Blacklist, and that's written by Scott Myers. And now a very quick disclaimer. Those of you who have seen The Invitation probably are thinking that I'm pushing my luck just a little by categorizing it as replacement horror. And to be fair, you probably have a point. But director Karin Kusama herself has cited the Philip Kaufman 1977 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers as one of her inspirations for the film. And whilst it may not have the pod people or uncanny valley antagonists that we most commonly see in the subgenre, it certainly leans into the horrors of no longer recognizing a person you once thought you knew, and the various insecurities that are thrown up as a result. And so, while, yes, I admit, I am being rather tenuous with this week's lead-in, there is a slight kernel of relevance. Plus, I do get to talk about some really good movies and books, so I'm just going to ask you for a little bit of grace, at least for the next few minutes. Our journey really begins in 1938 with the publication of the novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. This is set in the frozen isolation of Antarctica and depicts a group of American researchers who uncover a buried alien spacecraft beneath the ice, and nearby the preserved body of a grotesque humanoid creature. They bring it back to their base, intending to study it, but when it thaws, it comes back to life, and they quickly realize they've awakened something far worse than they imagined. The creature isn't just alive, it can imitate any living thing perfectly, even down to memories and behavior. So anyone on the base could already be one of them. This story probably sounds more than familiar, and it would first be adapted for the Howard Hawks movie The Thing from Another World in 1951, although the shape-shifting creature would instead be replaced by a humanoid vampire played by James Arness. It's a classic of 1950s sci-fi, and would of course be remade by John Carpenter in 1982. For his version, called more simply The Thing, Carpenter would return to the source material for a far more loyal adaptation, which, though largely ignored by both critics and audiences at the time, has gone on to become a cult classic, and a testament to the lasting impact of practical effects over and above CGI, all courtesy of special effects guru Rob Bottin. However, a lesser-known and very loose adaptation of Campbell's novella came a decade before Carpenter, with the Spanish-UK co-production Panic on the Trans-Siberian, also known as Horror Express. In this movie, released in 1972, anthropologist Christopher Lee boards the titular Trans-Siberian Express with a frozen humanoid that he discovered in Manchuria, only for the creature to thaw out and wreak telepathic havoc, its intelligence leaping from host to host and passenger to passenger. It's a very fun movie with great performances from Lee, Peter Cushing, and Kojak himself, Telly Savalas, and it's available to watch, as most of the films are in this series it would seem, on YouTube. But after this beginning, the concept of replacement horror would really spring to life with the publication of the novel The Body Snatchers in 1955 from writer Jack Finney. A tale of small-town paranoia, the novel is told from the perspective of Miles Burnell, a doctor living and working in the California town of Santa Mira. One day, just as he is showing his last patient out of the door, soon-to-be love interest Becky Driscoll arrives, worried about her cousin Wilma. Wilma has gotten it into her head that her Uncle Ira really isn't her Uncle Ira anymore, and Becky is, quite naturally, rather concerned. Wilma has no real proof that Uncle Ira is no longer the same person, but she knows in her heart that this is true, though her passionate conviction might seem more like the ravings of a very troubled woman than it does anything else, as evidenced by this direct quote from the novel. Wilma sat staring at me, eyes intense. "I've been waiting for today," she whispered, waiting till he'd get a haircut, and he finally did. Again, she leaned towards me, eyes big, her voice a hissing whisper. "There's a little scar on the back of his neck. He had a boil there once, and your father lanced it. You can't see the scar," she whispered, "when he needs a haircut. But when his neck is shaved, you can. Well, today, I've been waiting for this. Today he got a haircut." I sat forward, suddenly excited. "And the scar's gone, you mean?" "No," she said, almost indignantly, eyes flashing. "It's there. The scar. Exactly like Uncle Ira's." End quote. And, as you are no doubt aware, more and more people in Santa Mira start believing that their relatives and friends have been somehow misplaced, leaving Miles and Becky to wonder if there is some form of mass hysteria, or if something more insidious is happening, which, of course, it is. In 1956, just 1 year after the book's publication, Allied Artists Pictures distributed the independently produced movie adaptation, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, directed by Don Siegel and starring Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winter. The film was a huge success, earning more than $1 million in just the first month, and whilst it was largely ignored by critics at the time, it has gone on to be a classic of science fiction cinema. It was remade in 1977 by Philip Kaufman, who moved the narrative from the small-town, close-knit community of Santa Mira to the urban sprawl of San Francisco. It was adapted again, this time just titled Body Snatchers, in 1993 by director Abel Ferrara, who relocated the plot from San Francisco to a military base, and then once more again in 2007, this time just as The Invasion, starring Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman. As well as the official remakes, you can also see the seeds of the pod people in a large number of TV shows, books and movies, in particular the 1998 teen sci-fi movie The Faculty, which owes a huge amount to the novel, and in particular the Philip Kaufman and Don Siegel film versions. It is of course common knowledge that the book and the film are analogies for communism or even McCarthyism, but sadly, like so much that is common knowledge, this isn't actually true. Writing to Stephen King in 1979, Jack Finney had the following to say about the various interpretations of his work. Quote, "I have read explanations of the meaning of this story, which amuse me because there is no meaning at all. It was just a story meant to entertain, and with no more meaning than that. The first movie version of the book followed the book with great faithfulness, except for the foolish ending, and I've always been amused by the contentions of people connected with the picture that they had a message of some sort in mind. If so, it's a lot more than I ever did, and since they followed my story very closely, it's hard to see how this message crept in. And when the message has been defined, it's always sounded a little simple-minded to me. The idea of writing a whole book in order to say that it's not really a good thing for us all to be alike, and that individuality is a good thing, makes me laugh." Director Don Siegel had a similar view, saying in 1956 that the film was just a thrilling entertainment about a strange and terrifying situation. What would happen if your closest friends or family weren't quite themselves anymore? Over time, his views changed somewhat, and he is quoted in the 1975 biography, Don Siegel, Director, as saying, quote, "I felt that it was just a story about the way that people are dehumanized, not only by McCarthyism, but by many other things. People are becoming vegetables. I don't just mean the communists. In my mind, the picture was of a society that is becoming less human and more conforming, less able to think for themselves." End quote. Now, to be fair, this entire podcast is about how horrors are a reflection of the time in which they are made, and also the meaning that we can ascribe to things in hindsight. And I know that I've certainly done my fair share of that over the last few episodes. So we can't really say for certain that the fears of the time of both communism and McCarthyism didn't creep in there somewhere, albeit unconsciously. But the much heralded opinion that this is a fact of the movie, and also of the book, is actually just an interpretation, and it's always good to bear that in mind. Whilst Invasion of the Body Snatchers has become part of the public consciousness, with the expression pod people slipping into everyday parlance, it's not the only example that we would see emerging from the later half of the 20th century. In 1955, BBC TV series Quatermass 2, written by Nigel Neal, gave us possessed alien people acting like soulless automatons, while the 1963 story 8 o'clock in the morning by Ray Nelson follows a man who, having been hypnotized on stage, realizes that the world is populated by aliens who hide coded and subliminal messages in order to control the human race. This story would form the basis of another John Carpenter adaptation released in 1988 called They Live, which starred former wrestler Rowdy Roddy Piper. A few years later, Stephen King would offer his own spin on the trope with his 1993 short story The 10 O'Clock People, in which a very specific level of nicotine in the bloodstream allows a select few to see the truth, that the upper echelons of society are actually grotesque, bat-like aliens bent on world domination, and that's a concept that feels increasingly plausible with every passing day. Meanwhile, back in the UK, the 1980 Hammer House of Horror TV series gave us the episode entitled The Two Faces of Evil, in which the survivor of a car crash involving a mysterious hitchhiker begins to suspect that her injured husband is, in fact, some kind of imposter. This entire series was a classic of my youth, back when British television seemed to take real pleasure in scaring the crap out of you on a weekly basis, and this episode was, at the time, one of the standouts, if not in hindsight. To be honest, I don't think it's aged quite as well as some of the other episodes, but if you're in the UK, it's available on the ITVX player, so you can take a look and judge for yourself. Moving into the 21st century, in 2008, the British-French co-production The Broken starred a pre-Game of Thrones Lena Headey, playing a doctor who, much like Cousin Wilma, begins to suspect that those around her are being replaced. But this time, it's not aliens behind the switch, it's doppelgangers, uncanny doubles from a parallel world that is accessed through mirrors and reflections. In 2013, the science fiction movie Coherence gave us a whole range of alternate selves from overlapping realities, triggered by the passing of a mysterious comet. And in the 2018 movie Cam, we meet Alice, played by Madeline Brewer, a webcam performer who wakes to find that she's been replaced on her show by an exact replica. It's a compelling premise, but let down somewhat by its muddled execution and rather underwhelming conclusion. All of which brings us to the first of this week's movies, They Look Like People. Released in 2015, it was written and directed by Perry Blackshear and stars MacLeod Andrews, Evan Du-Michel, and Margaret Ying Drake. This movie, for some reason, gave me a huge amount of anxiety on first viewing, and I'm not embarrassed to say that it got so bad I had to switch it off about halfway through, only to return to it 20 minutes later. It's one of those films where it is best to go in knowing absolutely nothing, and I am going to spoil it very early on in this discussion, so if you want to watch it before I continue, it's available, as of the time of recording, and if you're in the UK, on Apple TV, Amazon Video, Sky Store, Microsoft Score, and also for free on Plex. And now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's just discuss the fact that this movie is something of a Trojan horse, initially masquerading as a horror film, to then subvert the trope of replacement horror and explore the impact of schizophrenia. For some people, this may come as a disappointment, particularly those looking for a clone of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and there's a sentence full of irony, if ever there was one. Director Perry Blackshear has recalled that there were those who were disappointed at early screenings, expecting the climax to reveal a nasty alien infestation, and some online reviews echo this sentiment, bemoaning the fact that for them, quote, nothing really happens, end quote, which, quite frankly, is missing the point of the film. For Blackshear, the theme was an incredibly personal one, recounting in an interview that it was based on the experience of one of his friends. His friend had started to experience auditory and visual hallucinations, seeing things in the shadows and hearing things that weren't there. According to the director, his friend later admitted that without the support of his good friends and family, he would most likely have ended up dead. 1 week in particular was especially critical during that period, and it was this pivotal moment and the dynamic between friends facing a crisis that inspired the film. And now for a very brief scientific segue. The unsettling conviction that a friend, partner, parent, or even a pet has been replaced by an identical imposter is in fact a real psychiatric disorder. Thankfully, though, it is a rare one. Known as Capgras delusion, or sometimes Capgras syndrome, it's named after a French psychiatrist, Joseph Capgras, who first described the condition in 1920. It belongs to a group of disorders known as delusional misidentification syndrome, conditions involving the mistaken recognition of people, places, or objects. Capgras delusion is most commonly observed in individuals with psychotic disorders, particularly schizophrenia, but it's also been reported in cases of brain injury and neurodegenerative diseases such as dementia and Alzheimer's. It's also been observed, to a lesser extent, in patients with certain forms of diabetes, hypothyroidism, and even occasionally migraine attacks. It's estimated to affect around 0.12% of the general population. But, after all that being said, this delusion was not the original concept of the film. Blackshear and his friends MacLeod Andrews and Evan Dumichel had originally met at college, where they'd made several films together. After graduating, they went their separate ways and found themselves working in industries that were less than satisfying, while still trying to make it in their chosen field. Wanting to reconnect and reignite the creative aspirations of their past, Blackshear suggested that they try making a film together, and after numerous telephone calls from East Coast to West, they decided to throw caution to the wind and work on a joint project. MacLeod and Evan bought tickets from LA to New York and were due to arrive for filming at the start of February. And so, of course, on Christmas Day, Blackshear decided to abandon a script that he had already written and go in another direction entirely. He has recalled spending all of January in what he called a wormhole of writing and revising, pitting procrastination against the shame that he would feel if his two really good friends showed up at his apartment and there was nothing there for them to film. Possibly a little bit more pressure than most of us would like to work under, but the strategy clearly paid off. The success of any film dealing with mental illness relies very much on how accurately the subject matter is portrayed and how sensitively it is handled, and we can all probably name movies that may have had the best of intentions but ended up as exploitative or even offensive. Wanting to avoid this, once the central conceit had been developed, both Blackshear and MacLeod extensively researched schizophrenia and psychosis, and in the process of drawing on medical information, they realized that what people experience in their minds is far scarier than anything that could actually be shown on screen. This realization led to a highly effective less is more approach to the movie. They Look Like People is a film that prioritizes uncertainty over the explicit, with the gradual unraveling of the central character the thing that really drives the tension. The opening of the movie, where Wyatt may or may not be seeing his girlfriend change, was drawn from one of Blackshear's nightmares, and also a real-life moment of fear when, on waking next to his partner, he saw their face distorted by its very proximity. Nightmares also figured in the sound design of the movie, with the buzzing of flies inspired by the darker dreams of one of the cast. The sound design in this movie is also one of the things which adds to the tension, in that there is next to no music, a decision that was made during the editing process. In watching the film, one suddenly realizes how quiet it is, and how much impact music, or the lack thereof, has on the viewer. Without audio cues to direct your emotional responses, you can feel somewhat cut adrift, adding to the sense of unease that builds through the movie's relatively short 80-minute runtime. What sound there is exaggerated and distorted, creating layers of texture that make the familiar, cracking twigs, running water, the hissing of a radiator, seem alien and unnatural. Some of the most important sounds in the movie are of course the telephone calls that form part of Wyatt's hallucinations, and these were again based on research and real-world case studies. In Wyatt's hallucinations, he is a chosen one, the person who can protect the world from the unnamed horrors that are slowly replacing humanity, and the various voices that we hear in the film were written and recorded with this intention, using quasi-religious terminology such as the word covenant, to lean into the idea that Wyatt is some form of messiah. These phone calls are the first real clue that we are playing in a very different arena than the title would have had us believe, and when we join him at a riverside meeting with a family friend and therapist, we know that things are seriously wrong, even if the earlier scene where he tapes a knife under a table has already nudged us quite violently in this direction. Wyatt, of course, is not the only one hearing voices, though the ones that Christian listens to are voluntary, even if they are nearly as damaging. These were loosely based on a rather odious publication entitled The Game, which was written by Neil Strauss, a self-confessed pickup artist, and published in 2008. This book listed a series of techniques for success in seducing women, and was incredibly depressingly a bestseller. It was even optioned for a film adaptation, to which the actor James Franco was briefly attached, which probably tells you everything you need to know about it. At the same time, Blackshear was exploring a wide range of religious and philosophical texts such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Bible, and this search for spirituality influenced the vocal tone of Christian self-help cassettes, which blend affirming language and a spiritual cadence with the game's Machiavellian manipulation and superficial solutions. As we see in the movie, the tapes don't work out too well for Christian, eventually getting him fired, much to the delight of his colleagues, who have found his attempts at dominating rather insufferable. This is not to say that Christian is an unlikable character, though he was originally written as far less sympathetic in earlier drafts of the screenplay. His story arc is that of a good man trapped by his own insecurities, trying to live up to an illusion of manhood, with the tapes and obsessive gym going masking a desperately unhappy person trying to find his way in the world. The scene where he drops his affirmation cards when he loses his job is evidence that he is quite literally not able to hold on to the stereotype he so badly wants to become, which, as it turns out, is fortunate for him, fortunate for Wyatt, and also very fortunate for the viewer. And watching in retrospect, Blackshear's screenplay seems now rather sadly prophetic, depicting as it does the origins of the epidemic that would eventually give birth to the likes of Andrew Tate and a legion of alpha male influences. The object of Christian's attention, Mara, is played by Margaret Ying Drake, who, along with Evan Dumichel and McLeod Andrews, has gone on to become something of a regular collaborator with the director. She is an incredibly well-rounded character, strong and independent, setting boundaries, and walking away from the situation when she feels uncomfortable. She is portrayed with a realism that is so often missing from female characters in genre films, and she's also responsible for some of the funnier moments in the movie, of which there are several, most notably when she demonstrates her real-life judo expertise, first on Christian, and then, rather hilariously, as she nearly breaks Wyatt's nose. There has been some speculation as to the character's fate in the movie after her encounter with Wyatt, and some suggestions that she perhaps has been killed and he has taken her car. But as Drake quite rightly pointed out in a later interview, Maya would have kicked the living crap out of him had he tried anything, so the chances are that the character is alive and well somewhere in New York. Whilst Drake gives a fine and naturalistic performance, helped no doubt by the improvised nature of some of the dialogue, the bulk of the movie is carried by Dumichel as Christian and Andrews as Wyatt. The relationship between the two characters is actually one of those rare things in cinema, a believable male friendship that avoids falling into cliché and supersedes the concept of bromance with which it could so easily and lazily be labelled. This was no doubt helped by the fact that the two actors are friends in real life, and the in-jokes and intimacy that they share, including drunken sock battles, a brilliant throwaway reference to the horrendous skinny jeans that were all the rage in the early 2000s, and Wyatt even shaving Christian's back before a date, provide a shorthand portrait of years of amiable companionship. I honestly can't remember seeing a film that depicts male friendship as well as this since Stand By Me in 1986, and those characters were teenage boys. I think it was this dynamic that led to my rather uncharacteristic anxiety levels when first watching the film. I genuinely cared about both characters and was fearful that something terrible would happen to one or both of them, which, given the nature of the horror genre, seemed somewhat inevitable. It's this dynamic which also made the last 10 minutes of the movie, for me at least, rather unbearable. But even before this sequence, there is the heartbreaking moment when Christian realises exactly how far his friend has fallen, as Wyatt passes him a note warning him of the dangers that he perceives to be around them. We know, at this moment, that it is likely only a matter of time before Wyatt starts suspecting his friend has also been replaced, and also fear that the Christian we have seen up to this point is hardly equipped to manage the situation. Ironically, of course, for a character who has tried so hard and failed to quote-unquote dominate through the entire narrative, it is Christian's vulnerability and love for his friend that saves them both in the end. As Margaret Ying Drake said in the commentary on the Yellow Veil Blu-ray release, quote, "You can feel how hard Christian is trying. His strength isn't bravado, it's being vulnerable and staying present." End quote. Evan Dumichel takes it a stage further, saying that the film is about being strong for your friends, not through toughness, but through presence. And that, he says, is what really stuck with him. If Christian is the beating but broken heart of the film, Wyatt is the character who sets the pulses racing, with a performance from MacLeod Andrews that is nothing short of sensational. Veering from prey to predator as the film progresses, his increasing capacity for violence becomes genuinely terrifying, and from the moment he sells his laptop and returns to the cellar with a bag full of weapons, practicing first with an axe and then with a nail gun, the viewer is left in a state of sweaty anxiety. The choice of a nail gun as his preferred weapon is particularly wince-inducing, first putting it into his mouth and then standing on a rooftop and aiming it at passers-by in the street below. This moment serves as a significant turning point for both the character and the audience, and the sense of unpredictability is perhaps the most frightening thing in the movie. We do not know what he may do to himself, or to Christian, or Mara, or indeed to anyone passing by, and this only adds to the tension that has been bubbling through the film. At the same time, though, it is a testament to his performance and Blackshear's scripting that his actions are neither cliché or seen as edgy, and both have said that this was a conscious decision that they were careful to adhere to. They Look Like People neither demonizes mental illness, nor does it romanticize the subject, presenting it instead in an almost documentary style, which is helped again by the lack of music and the handheld camera work. And for anyone who was as anxious as me in the nail gun moments, you will no doubt be relieved to hear that it was never ever loaded or even charged on set, with the nail firing sequences instead relying on close-ups and a hammer being used off camera. Funded entirely out of Blackshear's own savings, the project operated on a micro-budget and was largely shot across a 17-day period, mainly in Blackshear's own apartment, the corridor outside, and MacLeod's grandmother's basement. The production team consisted entirely of Blackshear and his 3 lead actors, resulting in a highly focused and intimate set that allowed for spontaneous creative decisions and improvisation. Much like Martin, which we discussed last week, the filmmakers had to take a guerrilla-style approach to shooting days, using real locations, available light, and practical effects to maintain authenticity and to keep costs down. Blackshear's editing process also proved to be as drawn out as the shoot was fast. Once filming wrapped, he spent an extended period in post-production, meticulously refining the film. It was during this prolonged editing phase that the distinctive tone really took shape, with Blackshear continually pulling back on more explicit scenes in order to preserve an atmosphere of ambiguity and unease. The result is a taut 80-minute film that strikes a balance between rough around the edges realism and nightmarish tension, and it's also a testament to what can be achieved with limited resources and a wealth of talent. If nothing else, it should be applauded for that alone. Fortunately, though, people applauded for far more than that. After completion, They Look Like People became a breakout success on the festival circuit, earning widespread critical acclaim and a raft of awards. The film had its world premiere in January 2015 at the Slamdance Film Festival and received a special jury honourable mention for narrative feature. At the same event, Filmmaker magazine praised the movie for its rare filmmaking skill, its brains, precision, and its outstanding performances, saying that it would silence critics who claim that very small and contained films can't be riveting and brilliant. This strong debut marked the beginning of a nearly year-long festival run, striking a chord wherever the film played. It also won a string of awards, including the Grand Jury Prize for Best Narrative Feature at the Independent Film Festival in Boston and the Most Innovative Film Award at Fantasia in 2015. And at the Nashville Film Festival, it swept the Graveyard Shift horror category, winning Best Actor, the Grand Jury Prize, and the Audience Award. In the years following its 2015 debut, They Look Like People has steadily built a wider audience through video on demand and also streaming platforms. What began as a no-budget passion project among friends has, over the course of a decade, earned its place as a modern indie horror classic, widely respected not only for its craftsmanship, but also for its deeply human exploration of mental illness and friendship. Mike Flanagan, a director whose own low-budget debut, Absentia, was cited by Blackshear as an inspiration, has called the film one of the greatest miracles of DIY filmmaking that he has ever seen, and has listed it as one of his all-time favourite movies, hailing it as an inspiration to anyone who wants to make a film. Perry Blackshear has continued working in independent horror, writing and directing The Siren in 2019, which I haven't seen, and the psychological thriller When I Consume You in 2021, which I have seen and enjoyed very much. Both of these films reunited him with the cast of his debut, and he seems to be taking a similar approach to casting as Mike Flanagan, creating a family of talented performers with whom he enjoys working. Blackshear has not only cited Flanagan's debut as an inspiration, but also his more recent work, admiring his method of creating characters that he truly loves and then setting them in the environment of a horror movie. MacLeod Andrews, Evan Dumichel, and Margaret Ying Drake continue to work in independent film and television. All three actors are extremely proud of the film that they made, as they have every right to be, but they also seem rather amazed that it has gone on to achieve such a cult status. And in March 2022, this cult status was further cemented when boutique distributor Yellow Veil Pictures released a special collector's edition Blu-ray, which sits in my ever-growing physical media collection, right next to our second film this week. The Invitation was released in 2015 and was directed by Karin Kusama from a screenplay by Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi. It stars Logan Marshall Green, Tammy Blanchard, Mikael Hausman, and John Carroll Lynch. The writing partnership of Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi began when the two met at Brown University, when both joined an improv comedy group and found they liked working together. Moving from improvisation to writing and then performing in short plays, after graduation they moved to Los Angeles and began writing short films and spec scripts to get a foot in the door. This led to an opportunity with the Henson Company, who had some rewrite work on an existing project for them. Their first produced screenplay was the movie Crazy Beautiful, starring Kristen Dunst in 2001, and since its debut, they have continued to collaborate, working across a wide range of genre, including the story for The Tuxedo, which starred Jackie Chan and Jennifer Love Hewitt in 2002, and the screenplays for the films Aeon Flux, which starred Charlize Theron in 2005, the 2010 remake of Clash of the Titans, which starred Sam Worthington, and 2018's Destroyer, which starred Nicole Kidman. The screenplay for The Invitation was developed over several years and was inspired by their own experiences of grief and personal loss. Because, whilst this movie may appear, on the surface at least, to be about cults and strange Hollywood sensibilities, it is in fact a movie about grief and the damage that it can cause if not acknowledged and processed. The questions to which the writers, and also director Karin Kusama, kept returning were about the notion of suffering, and the meaning of pain, and whether attempts to remove pain don't actually heal us, but instead remove some essential part of the things that make us human. What the three of them crafted from these very existential queries is a taut and uncomfortable movie which, as well as the central themes, also takes some swipes at the Hollywood dinner party circuit, the need to adhere to social etiquette and to fit into group sensibilities, and of course, cult psychology and behaviour. I'm not going to be discussing much on the cult side of things this week, mainly because I'm talking about that in a few weeks' time, though I will touch on some of the psychology and belief systems that underpin the actions in the second half of the movie. The basic narrative is relatively straightforward. Our protagonist Will, played by Logan Marshall Green, along with his partner Kira, played by Emayetsi Corianaldi, have been invited to a dinner party at the home he once shared with his former wife, Eden. Will anticipates that the evening is going to be challenging, which, as it turns out, is a bit of an understatement, mainly as it was in this very home that his son sadly lost his life, an event which led to his and Eden's separation. For her part, Eden has been AWOL for a number of years following the tragedy, and this evening is painted as a reunion of sorts, not just of the two former partners, but also several of their other friends. This scenario allows our writers to introduce another theme and another question, which is how well do you really know someone? Phil Hay has called it emotional horror, saying that it would be terrifying to feel that you know someone very well, only for them to disappear and return a completely different person. It was this what if that the team kept returning to. Director Karin Kusama has called out this question in particular and has cited the 1977 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers as an inspiration. Kusama studied film at NYU's School of the Arts and gained critical attention with her debut feature Girl Fight in 2000, which won the Director's Prize and the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. Following this success, she directed Aeon Flux in 2005, a big-budget science fiction movie that was heavily altered during post-production by the studio, leaving her largely dissatisfied with the final product. However, it was also on this project that she started a relationship with her now husband, the screenwriter of this week's movie, Phil Hay, although the two had originally met at Cannes in the year 2000. Kusama returned to more independent filmmaking in 2009 with Jennifer's Body, a subversive horror comedy written by Diablo Cody, which was initially met with mixed reviews, but has since been re-evaluated as a cult classic. In 2015, she, of course, directed The Invitation, and she followed this with Destroyer in 2018, a crime drama led by Nicole Kidman. Since this time, she has worked largely in television, including producing and directing series such as The Outsider, Halt and Catch Fire, and Yellow Jackets. The Philip Kaufman version of Body Snatchers is not the only 1970s movie from which the team took references. The opening title font, which is in Helvetica, is the same font used for the 1976 movie All the President's Men, which starred Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, and was set during the Watergate scandal. Kusama has said that the team frequently thought about 1970s movies while making this movie, particularly the wealth of paranoid conspiracy thrillers that haunted the decade, including Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation from 1974, The Parallax View, also from 1974 by director Alan J. Pakula, and 3 Days of the Condor from 1975 and director Sidney Pollack. All of these are very good films, by the way, and I would highly recommend tracking them down, particularly The Conversation, which features a terrific performance by the late Gene Hackman. This fascination with the 1970s also extends to the house that was chosen for filming, and which was used for both exterior and interior shots. Located in the Hollywood Hills, it required a fair amount of work and set dressing to achieve the lived-in modernity that would be the best fit for Eden, and also her new partner, the ex-cocaine-abusing record producer David, played by Mikhail Hausman. For me, the location is really quite amazing, most notably the way that it is lit, warm and golden interiors opening up to blue exteriors with a swimming pool surrounded by deep green trees against a pitch-black night sky. The layout of the house also adds greatly to the tension, providing the ability to frame characters in small groups or in isolation, and also draw the eye to things that may be happening just slightly off camera. A key example of this is the sequence where Will and Kira have a rather heated conversation on the back terrace, with the audience's eye drawn more to what is happening behind at the dinner party table, just through the large window. One of the reasons that I paired this film with They Look Like People is that both explore the themes of delusion, paranoia, and the unreliable protagonist. Will is clearly suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, understandably triggered by returning to the property at which his child died, and the central tension lies in whether his suspicions are justified or merely the product of a traumatized mind. The screenwriters play with this ambiguity brilliantly, particularly in the sudden appearance of a character whom both we and Will had quite reasonably assumed had been quietly disposed of. Troy's return is a classic rug pull moment, one that calls into question everything we have come to believe or suspect up to that point. Perhaps then we have also been wrong to assume that the character of Claire, who left the party earlier, is dead in her car in the rain outside, unless Troy happens to be as unobservant as he is tardy. This back and forth in the mind of the viewer is of course not just down to the story and direction, but also to the stellar performance from Logan Marshall Green, an actor who we will be seeing again in just a few weeks. Ironically, he was not the first to be cast, even though the narrative revolves around the character. Kusama had always envisioned John Carroll Lynch as the character Pruitt. In fact, the role was written for him, and also Lindsay Burge as Sadie, the rather unhinged cult member. On meeting Logan Marshall Green, Kusama felt an immediate connection and believed that he could bring both sympathy and an underlying sense of danger to the role. Once he was on board, they built the remaining relationships around him, particularly with Tammy Blanchard as Eden and Corey Rinaldi as Kira, two actors that Kusama had already hoped to work with. And in a moment of pure serendipity, when the cast all met for the first time for 2 days of rehearsals just prior to filming, it turned out that many of them knew each other from former projects, and this helped to create the bonds of friendship and intimacy that we eventually see in the film. But I digress. Let's go back to Marshall Green just for a second. Genre fans will, of course, recognise Marshall Green from his roles in the 2010 movie Devil and Prometheus in 2012. He also starred in Upgrade in 2018 and Intrusion in 2021, but his career has spanned a wide range of films and TV appearances. In this movie, he delivers a performance of a man who is truly on the edge, haunted by his past and continually gaslit by the people around him, most notably Eden and David. Displaying an incredible range of emotions, he switches from suspicious to angry to paranoid to broken to crying and back again several times across the course of events. In a 2015 interview, he explained that he was drawn to the project by its exploration of grief and trauma and how people carry those burdens. He also said that when he met with the director, he realised that they shared the same vision. He was less interested in making a genre film and more interested in portraying a flawed, anti-heroic character, somebody who makes mistakes, and he felt that this aligned perfectly with both the director and the screenwriter's intentions. In his view, it is this complexity that elevates the film beyond its genre roots and gives it an emotional resonance. He is ably supported by the rest of the cast, and there isn't a discordant note in any of the performances. John Carroll Lynch is brilliant in the role of Pruitt, calmly certain that he has found the answer to all of life's problems and that his way is the right way. His monologue discussing the quote-unquote accidental death of his partner is beyond uncomfortable, And it feels all the more bizarre that by all accounts he is as far removed as it is possible to get from the heavyweight characters that he so often portrays. The rest of the dinner party guests, who are too many to name here, are all equally good, while the hosts of the evening, Eden, played by Tammy Blanchard, and Mikhail Hausman's David, are the very epitome of smug LA spirituality, and I've sadly met more than my fair share of those in my time. And of course, as the movie progresses, it turns out that, unlike Pruitt, neither Eden or David really believe in their spiritual mission. Eden becomes the personification of guilt and regret, while David seems far more concerned with acting out male jealousy at his partner's former lover, and less about saving him from pain, which is, of course, the promise on which the cult spectacularly fails to deliver. For a man who self-identifies as a reformed shallow person and who believes he has transcended his past superficiality, this seems like a return to David's usual algorithm, and probably explains why he still keeps a vial of cocaine in the house. The invitation is not just a reference to the invite that Eden and David have extended to their friends, it's also the name of the cult that has promised to deliver Eden from the pain of losing her son. This is the ethos on which the order is based, promising that pain can be avoided, even if that is through the transcendence of death, and their belief system is brilliantly foreshadowed by the opening moments of the film. On their way to the dinner, Will and Kira accidentally hit a coyote with their car, leaving it badly injured. Will does what many people might consider to be the right thing, and puts the animal out of its misery, albeit brutally. The question, of course, is whether he, or indeed anyone, has the right to end a life to relieve someone from suffering. Because that really is what the invitation offers, death as the end of suffering, and the promise of a peaceful afterlife. And put this way, their ethos is really not that far removed from many religions, even if the execution, no pun intended, is far more violently delivered. Like many cults, and indeed religious orders, the invitation offers a seductive proposition, reaching out to people who believe themselves broken and offering a cookie-cutter solution for all of life's ills. Quite honestly, it's not really a million miles away from the self-help tapes that we heard in our first movie. The video of the Mexican cult commune was the first thing that was filmed, shot in a recreation center in Topanga, California, and the expressions of the guests as they watch it are actually genuine. The first time that the actors saw it was the moment that their reactions were captured on film. In fact, the majority of the film was shot in chronological order, allowing for the development of character arcs as the filming progressed. Shortly after the video scene, the group are then invited to play a game, a boundary testing strategy that is employed not just by religious cults, but strangely adjacent groups such as fraternity and sorority houses. For the production team, another of the key messages is that boundaries are good, and that when people try to erase your negative emotions, or say there's no such thing as anger, or sadness, or fear, we should all pay particular attention. These are, after all, very big red flags. The question, of course, is why no one other than the character of Claire decides to leave. The invitation explores the tension between adhering to social convention, being polite, being a good guest, and the gut instinct that something is terribly wrong and we should really get the hell out. It's a theme that we've seen explored quite a bit in recent horror cinema, from Get Out in 2017 to Speak No Evil in 2022 and its 2024 English language remake. But while those latter two films certainly stretch credibility, the invitation remains more grounded, making it far easier to suspend disbelief. When Will questions why the doors are locked, David's reply that there have been neighbourhood break-ins and it's just for protection sounds entirely plausible. And, unlike in the other films I mentioned, in this film Will is a very unreliable protagonist, which adds another layer of ambiguity to the unease. This is also where the satirical swipes at the LA dinner party set take on a new meaning. Concerns about the cult's behaviour are lightly dismissed because, as the character of Tommy says, this is LA, and they're probably harmless. a line which generally raises a smile from the viewer whilst allowing members of the invitation to hide in plain sight. I won't go too much further into the climax of the film, but suffice it to say that the tension has been built so carefully that when the violence does erupt, it feels as much of a relief as it does a release. I will, however, mention one detail that remains particularly unsettling. It's Miguel's birthday, and Eden has brought out a cake. And this feels rather like the kind of gesture that you would make to a beloved pet just before putting it to sleep. It's yet another quiet reminder of the invitation's utter conviction and the terrifying depths of their belief. To quote theoretical physicist Steven Weinberg, quote, "With or without religion, good people can behave well, and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion." End quote. The invitation premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival on March the 13th, 2015, and it received a very strong response from the audience. A year later, the film opened in a limited theatrical release after it was acquired for distribution by Drafthouse Films. Critically, it was praised for its slow burn tension and sophisticated execution, with Variety describing it as a teasingly effective thriller, hailing it as Kusama's strongest work in years, whilst The Guardian called it an extremely tense and elegantly shot suspense drama. Since its release, the film has found a broad audience via streaming platforms, and it is now frequently cited as a hidden gem, a thriller that treats its audience like adults, which is a rarity in general, and especially in the horror genre. They Look Like People and The Invitation are both films which deal with urban paranoia, with one set on the East Coast in the cold, and one on the West Coast in the golden glow of the Hollywood Hills. But where the paranoia in the first movie is the result of mental illness, the tension and anxiety felt by Will in The Invitation is, as it turns out, not paranoia at all, but instead a perfectly rational response to what he, and he alone, sees is happening around him. In They Look Like People, the horror is internal, resulting from psychological illness that has gone untreated, and in The Invitation, the horror is external, resulting from emotions that have been suppressed, withheld, and denied. Both films also speak to a distinctly modern and urban kind of horror, the fear that madness is taking hold, or worse still, that perhaps it isn't, placing us in the perspective of the unreliable protagonist and building a considerable amount of unease throughout their runtime. Together, these two independent movies form a bleak and unsettling double bill about trust, grief, friendship, trauma, and the terror of being the only one who sees what's really going on, or possibly being the only person who doesn't. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And please also consider sharing this episode with any of your horror-loving friends. You can follow the show on Instagram at The Horror Double Bill, and please feel free to email us with your thoughts on this week's movies, or indeed any of the movies discussed in the series, at thehorrordouble@gmail.com. Next week, we'll be exploring a subject we touched on very briefly back in episode 3, with a double bill on the culinary delights of cannibalism. First up, we are going to be discussing We Are What We Are from 2010, and this is the Mexican original version directed by Jorge Michel Grau, and not the 2013 remake. Then we're heading off to France for Raw from 2016, from director Julia Ducournau, a multi-award-winning director and leading exponent of body horror movies. And her third feature will be out in August of this year, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So grab your napkins and a finger bowl, quite literally, and if you want to watch along, you can find We Are What We Are on Apple TV and Prime, and Raw is available on Prime and also for free on Tubi. I'll be back next Sunday for the discussion. Until then, have a really great week. Goodbye.